Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Amy Newmark. And she's here to share with us the new Chicken Soup for the Soul book, Be You, 101 Stories of Affirmation, Determination, and Female Empowerment. So are you looking for a great read to empower your journey? Just remember, you are unique, and that is your superpower. So many of you know Amy. She's been on the show before. She's a best-selling author, editor-in-chief, and publisher of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. Since 2008, she has published 133 new books, most of them national bestsellers in the US and Canada, and more than doubling the number of Chicken Soup for the Soul titles in print today. She is also the author of Simply Happy, a crash course in Chicken Soup for the Soul advice and wisdom that is filled with easy-to-implement practical tips for having a better life. So let's welcome to the show, Amy Newmark.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm very excited about this new topic. It's spring. It's like a spring awakening. And now we have this book about female empowerment and affirmations and determination and all the things that will help us kind of bounce into spring, with vigor in our steps.
Well, and I'm so excited about this book because it seems like it's just at the perfect time because we're kind of in this state where women are looking to be more empowered.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I actually had originally planned to release this book in the spring of 2020. And then the pandemic came along, closing bookstores, et cetera. And so I postponed the book 11 months. It said, well, we'll just put it out when we're getting near the end of the pandemic. So I had created the book because I had seen how women's rights and just all the misogyny out there was a lot of stuff that was happening that seemed to be taking women back, like they had taken 2 steps forward, but now there was 1 step back. And then when the pandemic came along, no fault of men, it was just that it hit women even harder because of childcare. And so I think delaying this book a year because of the pandemic has resulted in women needing this book even more now than they did a year ago.
Oh my gosh, without a doubt, because you cover things like, following their passion and dreams in business and arts and sports, speaking out against sexual harassment and discrimination. So you hit some really heavy topics that, women want to talk about.
Yeah. And women have really been under the gun in the past year because even though men try, when kids are at home being homeschooled, or when elderly parents need groceries and you can't see them in person and you have to figure out how to do that. And there's just so many tasks that seem to fall on women just because women seem to be naturally very good at getting those tasks done. And so I think that every woman has found she's got even more responsibility now than she did a year ago. And then at the same time, you hear the stuff in the news, the latest actor, musician, governor to be, accused of sexual harassment or worse. And so we just kind of feel like everything's happening around women right now. And we really need a boost. At least that's how I feel. I feel like a lot of burden has fallen on us. And then we keep hearing all these stories that make us realize, we haven't really made as much progress as we hoped we had made at this point. So I think that a book that says you are enough, you are already powerful, and you already have your superpower, which is that you are unique, I think that's very helpful to women these days.
Yeah, I think it's a message that we all need to hear because, yeah, you're right. I mean, when we hear about these things happening with sexual harassment, it does feel like, gosh, these people should know better, than the way that they're acting. And so it really kind of makes us feel like, gosh, if this is happening at high levels, maybe, as a governor or what have you, what's happening in other places as well.
Yeah. And we have stories, we have every kind of story in the book about women finding their true path to their version of happiness, women becoming more empowered, women finding ways to create affirmations for themselves. And we have what you would expect also, which is women actually fighting against sexual harassment. I mean, I wrote a story about this tennis club I used to belong to, where the men had engineered the rules in such a way that women couldn't play tennis on weekend mornings. Only the men could play on weekend mornings because their rule was that you could only play on weekend mornings if you worked full time. So even though I worked full time at that time, I couldn't find any other female member of the club to play with. And I was in a tennis tournament and I couldn't do my matches. And yet I was working Monday through Friday, commuting to New York City. So I had to play my matches on weekends, but I couldn't go on the court because the members I was playing against in the tournament didn't work full time. So it was this terrible situation. And I talked to the board of directors and they said, well, our rule is that you can't play on a weekend morning unless you work full time. And I said, well, I understand the reasoning behind that, but I can't play my tournament matches. And then I realized something. There was this guy who was really, really popular with everybody. And he played every Saturday morning, and he would always be called in to be the fourth when they were doing doubles. Well, he was retired. He wasn't working full time or even part time. He didn't work at all. So I called back this guy on the board of directors and I said, I'm so sorry that Gene is going to have to stop playing tennis on Saturdays. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I'm sure you realize he's retired and he is breaking the rules by playing on Saturdays. You'll have to tell him he can't play anymore on Saturdays. Well, that just crushed them. They ended up changing the rules as I wanted them to. And any member who worked full time could invite any other member, no matter what their working situation was, to play on Saturday mornings. And so then my next chore, you know what my next chore was? Getting the women to come and play with me on Saturday mornings because they were afraid to go on the courts. They were afraid the men would yell at them. I ended up getting them to go. I played a few more matches, lost, was eliminated from the tournament, which I couldn't have cared less about because I had won the real match that mattered, which was I had permanently changed rules that had been in place for decades at this tennis club. So I have that story in there. And then I have a story from Carol Harris Barton. And she was sexually harassed back in the 1980s. Listen to this. Her boss handed her a button that she was supposed to wear, I guess. And it said, your bed needs me. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how he thought that was going to be a good pickup line. And so she ended up, of course, turning him away and avoiding him as much as possible. Then she stopped getting raises. So she had to go to the HR department and confront him with the HR department chaperoning her. And it was terrifying for her. It was back in the 80s when it was even harder to do that than it is now. But she did it and she won. She got a transfer to another department. She got a promotion and she got thousands of dollars in compensation for her delayed raises that he had deprived her of because she wouldn't sleep with him. So we have that in there, which I think is great. And we also have a lot of stories from women who went into what were considered to be male professions. That's something that women have been breaking ground in for many decades, one profession at a time.
Well, and thank goodness for that. And you know what, when you look about you having to talk to the board about the tennis thing, it wasn't until a male member was going to have to make some changes that they really took a look at that. And so you're like, okay, wait a minute. You guys have your perception all wrong. I mean, I just applaud you for doing that, but it's like they're really having to dig themselves out of the Stone Age.
Well, they also knew that he was retired. They knew he was violating the rule. And they were just so fat and happy with their tennis courts that were reserved for men on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings. And they just were like so entitled to have those courts. It was really annoying, but I beat them. And that's what matters. But, sometimes you don't beat them, but you got to try. Because every time you do beat them, you've made real progress. And it also makes you feel more empowered to take on the next battle. We have some women in Chicken Soup for the Soul BU who broke into very male dominated professions. For example, we have a woman, Laura Savino, who became a commercial airline pilot for United Airlines. And, if you flew United over the last 30 years, she might have been your pilot. And still, I know when I hear a female pilot come on, to welcome you on board, it's always a little surprising, right? It's really been very male dominated. But she broke into it. We have another woman who became a helicopter instructor, another woman, Maria Rodriguez, who wanted to become a helicopter pilot and actually transferred colleges to a college that was next to an airport where they would accept her for helicopter training, and ended up working for the Navy as a helicopter pilot and was an incredible pilot. She lived in St. Thomas, and after the hurricanes there in the last few years, she, walked hours, on the completely devastated island to the hangar, somehow got her helicopters out from, the ruins of the hangar around them and started flying rescue missions. And she actually took some of the first photographs and video of the devastation after the big hurricanes that hit them a few years ago. Her daughter wrote the story for our book. Unfortunately, Maria Rodriguez, who I've flown with 4 times, died in a helicopter crash a few weeks ago, which was
oh my gosh,
mind-blowing for me because she was such a fabulous pilot. But we have her story in here. She's really well known in the helicopter world for running her own helicopter company. Her story describes how the few female helicopter pilots that there are call themselves the whirly girls. So that's kind of fun. Oh, and Laura, the one who flew for United Airlines, she had part of her story was that her little son came home from school and said, I don't want to be a pilot. That's a girl's job. So I thought that was kind of funny.
oh my gosh.
Of course, he turned into a male chauvinist anyway, at age 6 or whatever. He went all the way to, oh, that's a girl's job.
Oh my gosh. Well, and then you have really simple things that I think everyone can relate to as well. I mean, you talk about I think it's number 9, talks about what breaks you. And it's just, this woman ends up going through a breakup and realizes that she's putting her boyfriend's needs before her own. And how many of us do that and really need to make shifts?
Yeah, I know, because she was adopting his likes and dislikes as her own. And he was actually pretty wise because he broke up with her and said, you have to figure out who you are. That was a wise boyfriend, even though she didn't realize it at the time. But then over the next 6 years, she did the hard work to figure out who she was. And she says that she shed massive layers of the shy, reserved, afraid, and dependent girl that she had been at 21. And she took back all that power she had ceded to men. Kudos to that boyfriend. He didn't want her to cede power to him. He wanted her to be her own self. But now she says, now in her late 20s, now she knows who she is and what she wants and deserves. And she's ready, to try for love again. And we do have a number of women in the book who talked about realizing what they deserved in romantic relationships and making the changes that they needed to make. And then there were women who were in a fine relationship, but were so dependent on their husbands. Like one woman didn't know what she would ever do if she lost her husband. And then she did lose her husband to prison. He was sentenced to prison for a crime that he committed. And he was gone for 1 year. During that year, she had to figure everything out by herself. And she really became the full person she never had been when she had been relying on him. So he came home to a woman who was now fully developed as her own person and even had scored a 3-book publishing contract during his year away.
Wow, that's impressive. And it's interesting, when the husband comes back, I mean, they may not be compatible anymore, because of they're totally different people.
And that happens. I mean, you hear about that all the time, like when men come home from military deployment and the wife has become, so independent, so strong while he was gone. And then they have to learn to fit back together again with her ceding some of the decision making to him again, et cetera. So that does happen. But I think that most men can handle that because most men would prefer to have their wife or partner be a fully developed version of herself. You certainly would hope so, right? But
Oh, yeah.
in this book, if the men wouldn't accept a fully developed version of a woman, then usually they would break up, and the woman would move on. I really enjoyed putting this together because it allows us to share so many of the lessons that are so prevalent in all of our Chicken Soup for the Soul books, like the lesson about stepping outside your comfort zone, which I've always said is one of the best ways that you can change yourself and make yourself happier. And we have a lot of women talking about that in this book about, being yourself. Like we have this one woman, Rachel Muller, and her mom died. And somehow that just shook Rachel free from this rut that she had put herself in. And she said in her story that for most of her adult life, she had chosen to stay what she called safely anchored, in a series of sheltered harbors, both literally and metaphorically. And she had always chosen security or safety over any kind of risk or excitement. So then when her mom died, it was like a button was pushed, and Rachel made this decision that she would live by the word fierce for an entire year. And she would say yes to all the things that she would normally turn down. So she took a dance improv class. She went caving, which I think sounds really scary. And then she went halibut fishing in open water. And this was a woman who was really afraid of being out on a boat, especially out in open water. But she just forced herself to do it. And then she kind of did a mind over matter thing and forced herself not to panic when they were out there in completely open water in the ocean. And she actually ended up enjoying it. And, when you do that, then you keep doing that and you start having a much more exciting life with a much broader life, right? It's so easy to let your life shrink and shrink and shrink and become narrow. It's so great when you regain control and you open up those boundaries again so that everything is a possibility for you, right? And anything anybody invites you to do, you're willing to do it. It's really great when you can put yourself into that position of making a policy of saying yes.
Yeah. And I think it really helps also because, when women are, I mean, especially during the pandemic, we've been so closed in and having to take on other responsibilities, like a lot of teaching, and working from home. A lot of people are learning how to, been learning how to do that over this time. And it's just interesting. I read one of them, I think it was number 24, that talks about 17 words and how a woman read a quote on Facebook. And then she realized that she's been doing her life wrong the entire time.
Yeah, because sometimes you know that you need to do something, and then it's just a matter of having that epiphany. Yeah, you're right. 17 words, because that's what happens sometimes, that you'll just have an epiphany when you read something that just reaches deep inside you. And so she had been scrolling through her Facebook feed and she saw a post from one of her friends, and her friend had written, "Let go of anything inauthentic and all activities that do not mirror your brightest intentions for yourself." And so she realized that she had been engaging in activities that really were not right for her and that did not represent her authentic self. And so she started, I guess she had been really obsessed with playing Farmville. Remember that farm game obsession? And
Oh,
so,
yes.
yeah. And so she started like realizing this is dominating my life. This is ridiculous. And so she started changing how she played the game so that she could go out and see her friends for dinner. But then she realized it was still dominating her life because she'd be checking her watch to see if she needed to go home and keep working on her Farmville game. And so she decided to just go cold turkey and stop letting this silly game dominate her life. And all of a sudden, she was going to a birthday party for a friend. She was going to a baby shower. She was walking the dogs outside and enjoying nature. She was working in her garden. She was writing Christmas cards. She was doing all kinds of things. And she says all of this happened because that Facebook post forced her to look at how she was running her life. And those 17 words changed everything about how she ran her life. And that goes into the whole concept of self-care and me time also. And I know we talked about our prior book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Making Me Time. And we got so many stories about self-care and me time that were submitted for this book about, being you, that we made a whole chapter about self-care and me time in this book as well, because it's really important, because women just tend to give and give and give and give and give, and let all of that giving overwhelm their lives and not take care of themselves and not do what they really need to do. And so I think that was a really good point that we made. One woman, Sophronia Scott, she wrote a story in that chapter, and hers was about how her son got into a really great magnet school, but it was, an hour drive each way. And so she changed her whole life so that she would enjoy it instead of having it ruin her life. And so she drove her son to school in New Haven, Connecticut each day. And then she hung out at Yale in the library, and she worked and she read and she bopped around the university town and enjoyed herself until it was time to drive her son back home again. And she didn't feel guilty about it, like, oh, I have to go home and vacuum or something. She completely changed her life to drive him to school and carved out that me time every single day while he was in classes. So I thought that was a good lesson in how you can completely transform your life and turn something that would have been a horrendous obligation. She would have been driving back and forth 4 hours a day. She turned it into something that was actually really productive for her and really pleasant.
Well, and one of the ones I really like too is number 28, where Skye talks about her smartphone detox. And here she goes and she loses her cell phone and then decides she's going to wait 30 days before replacing it.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do that, but I have to use mine for work. But sometimes I'll go for a walk without my phone for an hour, and that's kind of liberating, right? But anyway, yeah, she's really cool. I remember Skye had a story in one of our other books too about completely re-engineering Christmas for her kids and changing the way they did presents. So they dramatically reduced the number of presents they had each year, and they really created meaning. She's always making these really fabulous tweaks to her life. And I'm sure that some of our readers will try this 30-day smartphone detox also. And yeah, that was about her getting back to her authentic life, just as Trisha Fay got back to her authentic life with those magic 17 words.
That's just so empowering. And I think that this really kind of, has us thinking of other ways that we can give ourselves time, carve out the time for ourselves, and also just invest in ourselves.
Yeah, and you can work on redefining yourself too. Like we have a story in here from Carol Andrews, who used to be a television news personality. And then she left that career and she set out to rebrand herself. And so it's interesting because there's lots of different ways you can do that. And I like to include as many as possible in a Chicken Soup for the Soul book so that you can find one that actually works for you. So I loved Carol's approach because what she did was she used hashtags. And so I bet this will work for some people. She just said, okay, what do I want to be? And then she made hashtags author, speaker, TV personality, executive coach. And then she said, and what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of values do I want to embody? And so she made hashtags for service to others and kindness and the different character traits that she wanted to embody in everything that she did. And she allowed the hashtags to kind of be her guides. And, it's like, I remember when I was writing my book, Simply Happy, and somebody said to me, as you're defining what you want the book to be, go ahead first and write the book reviews for the book. Write the book reviews you want to see written about your book. And so I wrote the book reviews first, and then I wrote the book that would get those book reviews. And so Carol wrote the hashtags that she would want somebody to apply to her. And then she became the person who fit those hashtags.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that because it's really kind of declaring what you're going to be.
Yeah, I really liked it. And for someone else, it might be writing words and sticking them on the bathroom mirror and looking at them every morning. Everybody has different things that work for them. What's important is coming up with the energy and the motivation to do it, and realizing, wait, I am unique. That is my superpower. And I'm going to follow some of the role models and advice in the pages of this book to make the most of that superpower. And I'm going to find my own truth and be the true me, because that person is great and is enough and can do whatever she wants to do. And so that's what we all should be doing. And we just have to find the right way to set ourselves on that path. Some people have to first figure out, well, what path is it? Where am I trying to go? And then once they know that, well, what are the magic words? What's the magic method that's going to get me on that path and keep me going and keep motivating me when I have the inevitable failures along the way? Because of course, we all have those 2 steps forward and 1 step back days, right? So anyway,
Yes.
That's what I like about this. I found the stories in this book extremely empowering for myself.
One of the ones that really stood out for me is number 57, Looking Back, Paying Forward by Colleen. And it just talks about how, she had a lady who was a big sister for her that helped her go to college in nursing. And then she became a nurse and became a big sister too. I just love that. It's how we're empowering the next generation.
Yeah. And we have a whole chapter. That story is in a whole chapter that's called We Help Each Other, because I know that people say that women don't help each other. And there may be some organizations where that happens, but in general, women are very giving of themselves to help other women. And I mean, for Colleen, it was such a big deal that her big sister set her on the path to becoming a nurse. And so, of course, she wanted to go and do that for another, deserving young woman. So I loved that. And that whole chapter is filled with women who are helping other women get ahead. And I mean, there was one woman, it was story 62, and it was Amelia, who was an English language teacher to a bunch of kids who were learning English as a second language. And her female students didn't know that they had any career options other than becoming a homemaker or a hairdresser. And so she went and applied for a grant from the government, and she started this whole career program for these girls who were, the daughters of immigrants and who just didn't really know everything that was open and available for them in the United States, because that's not how it was in the countries that their families came from.
Oh my gosh, how empowering is that? Well, I just absolutely love this new Chicken Soup for the Soul book, Be You. I think it's such just a wealth of information for women to kind of get them thinking about how they can do things differently with their lives and just really be more empowered on their walk. Amy, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about this book and be part of your community?
So you can go to chickensoup.com, and then you'll see this book featured on our homepage, and you can click on it and you can look at it. There's a young woman on the cover looking very pleased with herself. I view this as a great graduation gift. My daughter-in-law just got her PhD, and I gave her a copy of the book as a gift because now she has time to sit and read. Although she does have a new baby also, in addition to her new PhD. But anyway, I thought she would get a kick out of it. This book is designed to empower, women who are 18 years old and women who are 80 years old. Walmart is carrying it, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. I mean, you'll find links to those places, all the independent bookstores on our website. You can also listen to the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast to hear stories being told from this book, because I'm going to have a lot of podcast episodes talking about some of these stories.
And there's so many great stories we haven't even covered in this book. So I'm so excited about this, and I'm going to be reading my book.
Well, good. Thanks.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, I really love coming on. You always help me get my thoughts in order when we come out with a new book. And so it's really fun to present it to you and your listeners early in the game.
Oh, we so appreciate that, Amy, and we love the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and so excited that you shared them with us. Again, if you'd like to connect with Amy, you can at chickensoup.com for more information. Chicken Soup for the Soul is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and pretty much any place you get books. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.